Welcome back, everyone. We have a very cool project in the shop today. This is a 2002 Corvette Z06 that hasn't seen a wash or any attention nor been driven in the better part of 9 years. Sitting beside it in the shop today, we have its much younger brother, a 2022 Corvette C8 in a beautiful color we just finished ceramic coating. We aren't going to make it look as perfect as this, but we're certainly going to try. The car was brought to us in a running and driving condition. It hadn't been started, driven, run, washed, or even seen for almost 9 years, and one of our partners, Fast Auto Concepts, went through the whole car mechanically to make sure it was completely safe to drive, changed all the fluids, and did a bunch of regular maintenance just to bring the car up to 2022 and not 2012. The paint is full of overgrowth. The car was full of cobwebs, spider webs, every imaginable kind of paint contamination. So this was going to be a trial of all of our technique and skill to try and revive this Z06. Thankfully, the interior of this car was actually in pretty good shape, all things considered. It had definitely been sealed for the whole time that it wasn't running. There was a lot of sign of mouse activity and little mouse poops everywhere. But considering that the car hadn't been used for as long as it is, graciously, there was not a lot of mold buildup. So that was a big plus for this project. We had a nice cloudy day today, so we decided to make the most of it and not ruin our shop floor, so we did this wash outside. There was so much buildup in all the door jams and the trunk jams that we decided to try to at least clean up the majority of it before we soaked it all and made it really thick and pasty. So we vacuumed up, blew out, and just spent a huge amount of time just trying to get the bulk of the dirt and buildup out of the car before we started our wash procedure. Once we had finished with all the jams, we started by doing a really good pre-soak of the car. This is a mild but definitely very effective detergent to try to lift off as much of the film and buildup before we start pressure washing. Our goal here was just to try to remove the bulk of all of the buildup on the paint first before we started scrubbing and risking scratching the paint any more than what might have been on there for all the years the car had been sitting. While we were waiting for the detergent to pre-soak, we decided to pop the license plates off just to make sure we could get up any buildup that might have been behind them. And now we'll give you a minute to enjoy this very satisfying rinse and power wash of 9 years of buildup in this paint. If you're wondering why we're using a bottom-up technique, which is a little unorthodox, it's only used when we have a really dirty surface that we need to track our power washing on. This isn't how you would traditionally rinse a car during a regular wash procedure. It's only when you have a really muddy surface or very dirty, contaminated surface where if you rinse top down, the water can kind of disguise the dirt until it kind of dries out. So we use a bottom-up technique whenever doing a really heavy soak like this, just so that we can track how much dirt's being removed. Our pressure washer is a fairly low PSI pressure washer that we use. It allows us to safely rinse the paint as close as we are. If if you wanted to, you could actually put your hand in front of that nozzle, and it might sting a little bit, but it's really not too bad. So it allows us to safely rinse the paint at a close-up without the risk of blowing any paint off the panel. With the body fully rinsed, we turned our attention to the engine bay. We were given the okay to do a nice thorough wash of the engine bay with a lot of water. When it's this dirty, it's the only option that you have. We were very careful to cover up the alternator and any other important electronics. And then we just started with a lot of scrubbing. While Quinn was still working on the engine bay, I turned to the wheels. We were using a non-acid wheel cleaner. When you have wheels this old and clear that's this old on the wheels to protect them, and using any kind of acids can be pretty risky. So this is a pretty mild wheel cleaner that requires a little bit more brute force to clean, but we were really impressed with how much the wheels actually cleaned up, despite the neglect that they'd seen for all the years. With the wheels, engine bay, door jambs, and all the small areas of the car cleaned and ready to go, we started our next phase of soaking. So this is with a really high lubricity soap that would lubricate our wash, seeing as we were going to be scrubbing this a lot more than we would with a traditional hand wash. I was getting pretty excited at this point because you were really starting to see the car shine through now that all of the gunk from 9 years was more or less gone. After we rinsed the car one more time, we started clay barring. So this is very different than your traditional clay bar. This is actually a clay mitt. We like using these for jobs like this because these don't retain dirt the same way that a clay bar does. A clay bar picks it up and retains it within the clay. This is really good to kind of mow down the paint and remove the bulk of the buildup. And if you're still dealing with a lot of contamination, you can follow up with that fine clay bar. We did one more final rinse, and the car was starting to look so good. You were getting a bit of an idea of what that wet paint look would look like on a cloudy day at this point. After the car was all dry, we moved it back and forth a few times, just pumping the brakes to clear all the moisture off the rotors so that they didn't rust really badly for the few days the car was in the shop. And now it was time to evaluate what we were working with paint-wise. This was a highly unusual form of paint contamination and a couple areas paint failure. Because the car hadn't been washed in 9 years, whatever had landed on it stayed on the paint and started to eat into it over the 9 years that it was sitting there. So, unfortunately, polishing was not an option, cutting it was not an option, and wet sanding to remove that upper layer was the only way we could get any kind of results out of the paintwork itself. And I'll show you a little bit more on that in a second, but we're going to turn our attention to the interior first. I was so focused on coming up with a paint solution to fix our clear coat problem that I completely missed Quinn going through all the trim in the car. But what we approached the trim was, it was already a very good interior, just way overdue for a good clean. So we did a very thorough full trim clean, brushed every surface to remove all the contamination from the years that hadn't been cleaned, followed up by a very thorough vacuum and steam cleaning of every single surface to deal with some of the mouse problems. We pulled up every compartment, cover, and trunk space we could find to make sure that there was no remaining mouse droppings or mouse urine. That is a terrible smell. And Quinn suffered through the steam cleaning of the entire car to ensure that all the smells were gone for good. While Quinn was working on the interior, I turned my attention back to the paint. Now, very interestingly, the side of the car that hadn't seen so much baked sun exposure was in far better shape than the roof, hood, and the top of the trunk. So we were able to stick to a pretty intensive polish solution, but no wet sanding on these panels, and the results kind of speak for themselves. Now, the goal we'd set here with the client was by no means show perfect perfection. It was a matter of getting the paint back to a very reasonable state with a good amount of gloss and light swirl removal, but by no means were we going for a show perfect finish. As for the damaged areas of the hood, roof, and trunk, this really became a project of save the client the recourse of a repaint. It was so badly damaged from the neglect that it had seen, and whatever had been on the paint likely was very acidic in nature and had completely eaten and damaged the clear coat. So what you're seeing here is the wool pad process of trying to recover the paint from a full round of wet sanding. We did a 1500, 3000, and 5000 cut of the paint to remove the top layer of damaged area and polished out from there. And this process was repeated several times, ensuring that we were measuring the paint to make sure we had enough to work with. And this was the very best that we could do in terms of saving the paint. The only way to get a showroom perfect finish would unfortunately be to repaint the hood, roof, and trunk, but we wanted to try to avoid that problem for the client. Once all the messy work was finished up, Liam and I polished out the rest of the car to its final finish and treated it to a very, very high quality paint sealant to hydrate the paint after all the years of neglect, and it adds a beautiful shine to the paint as well. Which brings us to the ever so satisfying before and afters. Thanks for watching, guys.